he speaks about what is the objective of creation. So we spoke, the man was created deficient, and the objective is to achieve a level of perfection. What is the ultimate goal for that? To recognize, and this was the opening statement of this work, Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, Yodata Yom, and we say this at the end of Olenu, the first paragraph of Olenu, Yodata Yom, and you should know today, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, God is the Almighty, Ein Od Milvado. No one exists who is the equivalent of Him. Ein Od Milvado. Nobody exists outside of Him. Outside of Him. And we explained the Echod, when we say in the Shema, Echod, nothing exists outside of Him. So to be able to recognize His totality is impossible. We know God has wisdom. To be able to comprehend and fathom the degree of His wisdom is impossible, His total wisdom. God is powerful. To be able to have any relevance, to be able to even begin understanding what that is, it's impossible. But one thing we could, through experiencing life, is to see nothing is the equivalent of Him. When it comes to wisdom, nobody's the equivalent of Him. Comes to power, nobody's the equivalent of Him. Comes to anything, Ein Od Milvado. That is the Yichud Hashem. That's understanding that He is one and there's none other like Him. That's the understanding. So by understanding nothing other than Him exists in any classification of power, and that's the extent of our ability. That's our limited capacity. Beyond that, we can't go. So he cites a Zohar. The Zohar says, Antu Chakim, it's Aramaic. You are the Chakim, the wise one. However, but we don't understand the degree of your wisdom. We know you're the wisest. But do we have any inkling of what the degree of that wisdom is? The answer is no. Antu Maven, we know you have a depth of understanding. But we have no understanding what that depth of understanding is. We're able to recognize His attributes, His abilities from our existence, seeing the way He interacts with His existence. But to understand the totality of any of these characteristics, it's an impossibility. His power, His wisdom, anything, because that's on an infinite level. We find that when Paro had a dream, which he realized it's something which has relevance to the future of Egypt, all these dream interpreters, they come and they offer interpretations. They didn't satisfy him until finally Yosef comes. They pull him out of a dungeon. Within moments, he interprets the dreams. It can be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and the famine is going to be so extreme that all the plenty and all the blessing will be totally forgotten. And this is depicted through the healthy flesh-laden cows and the emaciated cows. And immediately, he gives them a solution, how to deal with it. Appoint one person, and how to store the grain, and how it has to be overseen, and the distribution. Within moments, they're like dumbfounded. The dream interpretation is accurate. The solution is perfect. And this will save the country. And this is within moments, Yosef comes up with this understanding of how to deal with the problem. Paro is no ordinary man. He's the monarch of the most advanced civilization. He's seen it all. And he says to his courtiers, have you seen anyone, Asher Ruach Elokimbo? Have you ever seen anyone who has divine wisdom? This first time I've never seen anybody who has divine wisdom. This person possesses divine. He's a representation of the divine. You understand? There's certain things which you see, and especially if you really have seen it all, when you come upon something like this, it's only one thing. This man is imbued with God's wisdom. When you come to that level of understanding, you understand that is Yichud Hashem. Because this is impossible to be unless it's God himself. But do I understand who God is? No, we don't understand who he is. When God, at the time, God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. The Torah tells us God brought heaven to earth, and the mountain quaked, the earth quaked, and the nations of the world come running to Bilam, the prophet of the nations, and they say to him, Bilam, God is destroying the world. The world didn't have the capacity to receive God's presence on earth. It was quaking and looks like it was coming to an end. So Bilam says to the nations of the world, he says, you're a bunch of fools. God promised he will not destroy the world. So he said, maybe that's with water. Maybe he's destroying it with fire. He says, you people, you're such fools. Don't you realize God is giving his Torah to the Jewish people? That's what's going on now. Hashem owes lamo yitain. God is giving his power to the Jewish people. And when they heard that, they said, Hashem yivarech samo v'shalom. God should bless his people with peace. That was the interchange between Bilam and the nations of the world. From the beginning of existence till that moment, the world never reacted to any presence other than God's presence. One of a kind, nothing comparable to it. Who is God? We have no idea who God is. But one thing we know, whatever exists, nothing is the equivalent of that. He's the all-encompassing. Now we're reading about the 10 plagues of Egypt. We read in last week's reading, there was the hail. The hail wasn't just ordinary hail. This hail, the size of the blocks of ice that fell out of the sky, were the equivalent of meteorites falling out of the sky. Anything it hit, it destroyed. Whether it was human beings, livestock, trees, vegetation, everything was smashed, obliterated. In addition, it was fire. So it was also set on fire. There was deafening thunder. Thunder was so deafening, people felt they were going to lose their minds. Paro immediately summons Moshe and he says, Hashem ha-tzadik, ani v'ami ha-rishon. God's the tzaddik, and I am a people of the evil ones. Please pray to God, let him remove this. He prays, everything stops. The ice, meteorites stop in middle of heaven. No thunder any longer. And right away, Paro, what does he do? He sets a team, he does a survey. What is the extent of the damage? So he finds out that the flax plant and the barley crop was destroyed. However, the wheat and the spelt crop was not destroyed. When he saw that, he says, you people are not going out. One moment he's saying, Hashem is the tzaddik, and I, my people, are evil. Now that he finds out that there's a wheat and spelt crop who was not destroyed by this devastation, Paro says, you people are not going out. What happened? One moment he thought the end is coming. Immediately, he so-called does tshuva, repents, speaks like a person just walked out of our smeich after 25 years. And all of a sudden, a moment later, when he finds this wheat and spelt, people are not going. What happened? Now, idolatry means you believe they are powers, spiritual powers, deities. That's what they worship. No one power is the all-encompassing power. God is the Almighty. God is the omnipotent one. There's no level of existence that God doesn't will and dictate and control. And that's what Moshe says. Hashem is Yud-Ke Vav-Ke. Hoya, Hoya, Hoveviyeh. God is infinite. Everything emanates from him. So when he saw the hail coming and what it was doing, he believed, there's no question. Everything is coming to an end. When he found out that the wheat and spelt crop was not destroyed, he says, if God is the Almighty, why did wheat and spelt survive? You know what the answer is? Because there's a God of the wheat and there's a God of the spelt. It's this independent power. And God is not the all-encompassing power. The power initially believed, there's nothing like this. He controls everything. But who is he? I don't know who he is, but he controls everything. That's all I know. He's the all-controlling, willing God. Almighty. But if he's almighty, why did the wheat and spelt crop survive? Evidently, he's not almighty. He's a power, maybe more powerful, but there are other powers outside of him. And that's why he backed out. That's why he retracted. What we have to believe and understand and see from existence, there's no one like him. Do we understand who he is? No. Do we understand the extent of his wisdom, his knowledge, his understanding? The answer is no. But nobody understands the way he understands. Nobody has knowledge the way he has. Nobody has ability as he has ability. No one has power as he has power. What's the extent of his power? We have no idea. So we're only able to relate that there's nothing comparable to it. But you realize you got to see the whole picture. You meet a person is underweight and he's in physical therapy because his muscles are atrophying and he needs all kinds of nourishment and all kinds of exercise to build it. He meets a person. He weighs 80 pounds. He meets a 120-pound person. Beats him to a pulp. He's the almighty guy in the neighborhood. He doesn't realize that this 120-pound person, he barely carries books to school in his backpack because he's not aware anything else exists. If you see it all, nothing's comparable to God. So the realization is because nothing's comparable, but you have to see it all. If you see it all, then you understand it. But if you haven't seen it all, even though you don't understand the extent, but maybe there's someone out there who's his equivalent. The answer is, but we start from a different place. And this is what I said yesterday. We have a Masorah. At Sinai, God revealed to us that he is Ein Od Milevado. He's one, none other. And as we live our lives, and as we have all the takeaways, and as we study, and as we actualize our obligations, which are known as mitzvos, commandments, and are bound to his dictates, it becomes more clear and more clear. Not just because we accept as Masorah, but we see it in real time. We see it in real time. There's nothing compared. If you speak to people who are true intellectuals at one time, the most intellectual body of work is known. Today, people, they don't know. They ask who's the Secretary of State. They don't even know who it is. People who are graduate school, working on doctorates. There's nothing which is the equivalent of the Talmud. The intellectualism of the Talmud is one of a kind. Everybody knows there are no fallacies in the Talmud. If you really are a well-weathered analyst, scholar, and have a great mind, you will not find any fallacies in the Talmud. And if you feel you do, the person realizes it's his lack of understanding. It's not that there's a fallacy in the Talmud. There's the cogency of the logic is one of a kind. This is the bedrock of the of Judaism. This is the oral interpretation of the Torah. They may believe the Torah was written by man, whatever it is, doesn't make a difference. The written law is divine. The oral law is divine. The Talmud, all the 60 volumes of Talmud, all that, 61, that's all part of the tradition. That was passed down. That's fleshing out the Masorah based on the methodology which God gave us at Sinai, to extrapolate it all from the written text. But after everything's said and done, ain't old milavado. There's nothing comparable. Years ago, there was a person, maybe Larry remembers him. His name was David Finkelstein. David Finkelstein was the shamus in the Fifth Avenue Shul synagogue. He's the first, when they opened the synagogue, he was hired as the shamus. And he was a man, very humble man, non-assuming, but he was a great Talmud Chacham. And they called him David or Mr. Finkelstein. And he was really the backbone of that synagogue, even more than the rabbi, although he didn't give sermons. He had a certain sense of humor, very caustic sense of humor. Somebody would want to give him some money. He says, "You're not rich enough to give me a gift. Therefore, I can't accept it." That's what he told people. Didn't kowtow to anyone. So he used to tell a story. There was this young man. He was about 16 years old. And he says to his father, it was a person who was world renowned to be an apikoros. Apikoros means he was a heretic. And he says, I want to study under, and the person as this apikoros, his name was Pinchas Apikoros. And he says to his father, I'd like to travel to this far off location and be the protege of Pinchas Apikoros. I'd like to study under him. His father says, not a problem. When you reach the age of 20, you have my blessing, go study. At the age of 20, his birthday has it marked off on the calendar, departs. He's on his way to study, to become the protege of Pinchas Apikoros. But before he accepts you to be his protege, his student, before he agrees to mentor the person, he has to interview him. So he finally comes to the town and he says, could you tell me where I can locate Pinchas Apikoros? The moment she mentions that, it's a Jewish town. He sees all of a sudden grimaces on people's faces. This man is persona non grata. Says he lives on the outskirts of town. He's an apikoros. He's a heretic. So he goes and he finally locates the house. He looks through the window and he sees a man with a big beard, bareheaded, no cover on his head. And he's immersed in a large volume, some text. He doesn't know what it is. And he's studying. He doesn't know what he's studying. But he has a beard, no head covering, fully immersed. Knocks on the door, and the lights are on. The man is so immersed, he doesn't even hear the door knocking. Comes in, he stands right next to this Pinchas Apikoros that to try to get his attention, doesn't notice him. After 45 minutes, he lifts his head, he notices this young man. And he says, and he's like startled. He says, so what do you want? He says, I've traveled hundreds of miles because all my life I've heard about you and I want to become your protege. I want you to accept me to be a student because you're this great apikoros. I'd always like to be an apikoros. Okay. So he says to him, there are many tractates in the Talmud. He says, you ever study Bava Metzia? It's one of the tractates. He says, no. You ever study Sanhedrin? No. You ever study Sukkah? No. You ever study Shabbos? No. You ever study Zvachim? No. So he listens to this. He says, you want to be an apikoros? You're an amoritz. You're a total ignoramus. Apikoros means you know it all, and yet you reject God. You're a total ignoramus. You know nothing. How could you be an apikoros? You understand? To be able to see God, you have to see it all. Now you make your decision. Is it or is it not? But when you know nothing, what do you know? Where are you coming from? I don't believe in God. Do you believe that you're a human being? Well, I looked myself in the mirror. Who said that's what a human being looks like? Because when I look around myself, I see my peers. Maybe you're all not human. Maybe you're a bunch of pygmies. Have to work on 2 feet. You see gorillas and apes and orangutans. They're also running around on 2 feet. What does that mean? It means nothing. It's only once you see the full picture then you understand there's nothing like it. There's nothing like the Talmud. There's nothing but God. You see the tip of the iceberg. You understand there's a lot under that ocean, but you know that tip of the iceberg represents something which it takes down the Titanic. If the Titanic crashes into that, whatever's under that water. When you see even an inkling, an infinitesimal amount of God's wisdom, and you say there's nothing comparable to it, so you understand what God is, that God is infinite, that God's beyond. We can only process something within our own capacity. Our own capacity is limited, but within our limited capacity, we can say there's nothing comparable to it. Nothing. Give you an example. You have a diamond, the Hope diamond. So supposedly it's the largest diamond of that quality ever found and ever cut to have all its qualities, the color, the shape, the clarity, whatever it may be. But of course, there's nothing perfect. Because if God would create a more perfect diamond, a larger perfect diamond, everything's relative. But factually, if you saw it all, there's nothing comparable to that. Mr. Glick once told me, he was an expert in diamonds, one of the top in the world. He says if he hadn't seen a diamond for 50, 60 years, and he would see it, he'd recognize it immediately. How do you recognize it? He says, when you see a person's face and you recall the face, you know it's that person. He says, when I look at a diamond, I just don't see a stone. Every diamond has its unique characteristics, its shape, its color, its depth of color, its intensity of color, its clarity. When I see it, I see everything. So therefore, I could identify it for what it is. And therefore, when he sees something unique, he says, I've never seen anything like it. He had a blue diamond, Mr. Glick, a 40-carat blue diamond he had in his vault. And it was the most beautiful diamond he ever saw in his career of being in precious stones. And he put it in his vault, and he says, when the third temple will be rebuilt, he will donate it. It should be in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. That blue diamond, he will offer it, that they should insert it in the breastplate of the high priest. It was not for sale. Not for sale. It was a 40-carat blue diamond, one of a kind. He never saw anything like as beautiful, as quality. He said it's reserved for the third temple. The high priest should wear it in his breastplate. When he got old, somehow, he was like pained by it. And they went in the vault, it disappeared. Wasn't able to locate the diamond. Disappeared. Somebody walked off with it. But you know, in the diamond trade, any diamond of that quality turns up anywhere in the world, they know exactly, they could trace it back to the source. They try to find out where it went, anybody had it, totally disappeared. But again, in his career of knowing what's out there, never saw anything like it. So if you're well-versed in the Talmud, and you see the world, and you say, this is one of a kind, there's nothing comparable to it. So by the process of deduction, it's this and not something else. Many years ago, there was a person, he lived, the story goes back 38 years ago, 39 years ago, on 61st Street. This person lived on the outskirts of Albany, and he lived on a farm with his wife, and he had 2 young children, maybe 3 young children at the time. And his father, they were in the textile business. His father lived on Madison Avenue. There's a hotel called the Delmonico Hotel on Madison Avenue. And he would come in, spend the whole week in New York doing business, textile, a very wealthy family. And for the weekends, he would go up back to Albany with his wife and children on this farm. And that was his routine. And one day he drops in to a class, and he said to me, you know, I've been going to a certain class on the Upper West Side where a bunch of intellectuals get together, and we put out different concepts, theories about theology, about everything. And I realize after coming to one class of yours, sitting here for half an hour, all the years I listened to all that pablum, only now do I realize it's pablum. It was just a waste of time. People were stroking each other's egos, a shot in the dark. Even less than that, we go nowhere. Nothing concrete, nothing substantial, no substance, nothing. Here, I hear something concrete, something cogent, something which is consistent. I'm out of there, I'm here. And that was the beginning. This person became a totally observant Jew. And his family became observant due to that. What is it? I've never seen anything like it. When you're exposed to the Torah and you'll see through that lens, person walks at night, can't see at night. What happens if you have night vision glasses? It can be dark, pitch dark. You can see clearly at night because you're seeing through that apparatus called night glasses. When you see through the eyes of the Torah and you're oriented, you have that level of orientation, that spirituality, through which lens are you looking at the world? You're looking at the world through God's lens. When you see through the world through God's lens, you're able to discern between what is and what's not. Then you begin seeing Ein Od Milevado. Nobody exists. There's nothing comparable to what God is. Not in wisdom, not in depth, not in any ability. And when you say Almighty, you sense He's Almighty. And you understand He's the one He's the determinator. He determines everything. Come out over the Rahman al-Tabab. Whatever God decides, it's for the best. But it doesn't seem to be that because we don't understand. But you only understand that you don't understand when you understand that He understands. That's the way it works. Ignorance is bliss. Like the Apikoros said to that young man, you want to be an Apikoros? You're a total ignoramus. What do you understand? If you saw it all and then you pass judgment, is one thing. Just end with a story. I once told this story. There was a woman, I used to give a women's class many years ago, 11 o'clock one day a week. And one day, this young woman, maybe in her upper 30s, comes to the class dressed very conservatively, but she looks like she comes from a wealthy background. And afterwards, I say to her, how did you come to this class? So firstly, she tells me that she has a place in the city and she has a home in Greenwich, Connecticut. And she has two young boys. And she's a Reformed Jew. And she knows very little about Judaism, but she understands that unless she learns a little bit about Judaism, based on the possibility of her children marrying out, it's more likely to marry out. And she wants her children to marry Jewish spouses. She doesn't want them to marry out. So if she knows a little bit more about Judaism, that will prevent her children from marrying out. So that's why she came to the class. She heard about it, that's why she came. She wasn't an ordinary woman. This woman, she was the executive director of Metropolitan Museum of Art. She was the executive director of Carnegie Hall, and she's only about 40 years old, this woman. And she comes from a very wealthy oil family. And she's married to a person who's the top literary lawyer in the United States, one of the top. And he's employed, or he does work for the Mayo Clinic. Okay. So she has two young boys, and they went to a school on the Upper East Side, a private school. It was called Hiawatha. I don't know if it exists or not. That was the school. And she says to me, maybe you have an idea for my boys. I have a nanny, takes care of both of my boys. She picks them up from school. But you realize she could drop them off at the Yad Avram on 63rd Street. And if you have somebody who could study with them, it'll be a phenomenal thing. And the nanny will wait for the other one. And while the other one's being tutored by this tutor about Judaism, okay? So I arranged then that Rabbi Rieti, who's originally an Englishman, he was their tutor. And he tutored them from the age of, they were a year apart, from 4 and 5 till through their bar mitzvah. He taught about the holidays, which they have no idea. He taught him how to read Hebrew. He taught him how to say brachos, blessings. Taught about the holidays, the laws pertaining to all this. And they had an Orthodox bar mitzvah at the Metropolitan Club. That's where it was. And okay. But before, when I made the suggestion, she says to me, I have to discuss it with my husband. My husband says, yes, we'll do it. Otherwise, he says no, he vetoes it. He has veto power. She goes home, she discusses it with her husband. Husband's opposed to it. Opposed. He doesn't want his children to be tutored about Judaism. Adamantly against it. So I said to the woman, I said, you want to know something? Tell your husband I want to speak to him. I'd like to speak to him. Husband comes to 63rd Street, and he's a tall man, and he sits down. I said, why are you opposed? That your children should be tutored about Judaism. They know nothing. He says, because I feel that a person has free choice. And if they're tutored as children, well, I'll be taking away their free choice. So when they become older, they won't have a choice but to become maybe traditional Orthodox Jews. Once they're in college, if they want it, that's their choice. They're adults. But as children, to brainwash them, to teach them about Judaism, I feel I'm infringing on their free choice. This is what he says to me. So I said, I want to explain you something. Just to the contrary. If you don't give them some basic foundation about Judaism now, they don't stand a chance. Based on the statistic, they're gone. Even with this, now they have maybe a surviving chance. Maybe. But without it, not a chance. The statistic says they're more marrying out, they will assimilate. So he realized there's this great literary lawyer. He says, but I'll tell you the truth, that's not the real reason. When I was educated in the 50s, and I went to Talmud Torah, the quality of the education was so terrible, and it was so this and so that, I don't want my children to re-experience what I experienced. Okay? This is what he says to me. So I said to him, I thought you're supposed to be a smart man. Top literary lawyer. This great intellectual. I said, you mean to say you're passing judgment from your experience as a child in the 50s on the education system, Jewish education system in the mid-80s, early 90s. I said, if you go and you make an evaluation, you study the curriculum, you do your own research on what it is, and then you say, it's not for me, that's one thing. But to say, because what you experienced in the 50s, you're passing judgment in the mid-80s, 90s, I said, something, I'm shocked. That you have that status and that level of renown of being this lawyer, being this great mind, doesn't add up. This is what I said to him. He says, something? I'll agree. And he agreed. Based on that conversation, and his kids had an Orthodox bar mitzvah. Meaning, how do you even pass judgment on something you don't even know what it is? No, I don't like chocolate cake. You don't even know what color it is. You don't even know what the ingredients are. But I heard it's the same color as mud. And I don't like mud, so how can I eat chocolate cake? It's liquid. Well, liquid is, sulfuric acid is liquid. So, maybe you shouldn't drink water because it's also liquid. What are you talking about? You're talking like you left your brain somewhere. And you're supposed to have a superior IQ, understanding who you are. Ain't old milavado. There's no way to understand who God is. But understanding there's nobody like him, based on our understanding, that we could come upon that. And that's the objective of every Jew, to study the Torah. Keep your eyes wide open. Continuously make evaluations. And keep moving and understanding and becoming more impressed based on what we see in our lives and our own existence.